When I first stepped onto that parcel of scrub and pine, my boots sank into a carpet of dry needles and something in my chest unclenched. 20 years felt like a held breath. Courtroom's fluorescent light, the sour tang of reheated coffee, and men in suits who practiced pretending. Out here, the air was sharp in a way that felt honest. It smelled of pine sap and the cold breath of the lake a little way down the hill. For the first time in a long while, the world seemed to be operating by natural rules instead of procedural ones. The cabin was a wreck in the way that made most people turn around and go home. One side of the roof had collapsed inward. Windows were either boarded or cracked. Vines had gone to work on the porch rails like they owned the place. The gutter sagged. The paint had long ago given up. But to me it was a second chance. Plain and simple. 3 acres, bordered by trees on 3 sides and the lake on the 4th. No neighbors in sight, no city noise, and, at least on paper, no bureaucracy. The deed was clean. County records matched. I'd even driven down to the assessor's office and triple-checked before wiring payment. I knew exactly what I'd bought. I didn't come with a glossy renovation plan. I came with a truck loaded with tools, a portable generator, water tanks, a camping bed, and a dumb supply of chili. I planned simple work. Fix the roof, get the plumbing going, patch the basics, and make the place livable enough to stay. I spent the first 4 days getting the cabin to a place where I could sleep inside and not worry a raccoon would try to move in with me. On day 5, I set up solar panels and mounted a couple of cameras. Not because I expected trouble, but because old habits from years of chasing people who made trouble for a living don't die overnight. The first week was quiet in the kind of way you forget exists when you live within siren range. The nearest road was a half-mile out. Nights were punctuated by owls and the whisper of wind through pines. I relaxed into it faster than I should have, as if the silence itself was a salve that would always be there. Then, on the 8th day, a black SUV crawled down the gravel track that skirts my property. No plates, tinted windows. It didn't stop at the cabin. It idled by the tree line for a few minutes like a spider hanging at the edge of its web, then backed up and drove away. Strange, but not immediately dangerous. Maybe a lost hiker. Maybe some local scout. The next morning someone had forced my driveway gate open. A wooden stake with a shiny aluminum sign had been driven into the dirt. Private community area. No trespassing. It was not a county sign. It wasn't even legal looking. But it was deliberate. I filmed the sign, the broken hinge, and the perimeter where there were no official markers or fences. I wasn't a member of any HOA. I had the title and the county maps. Still, that sign landed on me like a warning. I put up more cameras and reinforced the gate. A man who has been in enough fights to know his own pulse will tend to prepare for the next one. I wasn't looking for a war, but I wouldn't surrender the property I had paid for because someone decided to claim it by intimidation. 2 days after the sign, while I was clearing brush near the shed, I found one of the solar panels tampered with. Bolts loosened, panel tipped away from the sun. Someone had tried to disable the array without drawing obvious attention. That night the woods felt crowded. Every creek and grow in the dark had weight. I kept the shotgun near the bed and watched monitors. The day after that, 3 men in matching forest green polos and a gold crest strode to the open gate like they owned the place. They were carrying themselves with that limp authority of men who had decided rules are optional. The patch on their shirts read Clearwater Bay Security Patrol. 2 had sidearms, not police issue. The man who came up to me without greeting had the kind of posture muscle memory that speaks military or long years of enforcement. He would later be named Henry Lott. "You can't be out here," he said flat, like he was doing me a favor by delivering the news. "This is Clearwater Bay jurisdiction. You're trespassing on HOA managed land." I showed him my recorded deed location, the county clerk's stamp, the assessor's map. He scoffed. "You can wave your little paperwork around all you want. We don't go by courthouse politics. We go by the community charter." There's a slow metallic sound that runs behind your teeth when a threat becomes official. One of the other men wandered the perimeter. Another filmed the clearing with a phone. I kept my voice level, recording the interaction. "If you don't leave, I will call the sheriff and file criminal trespass." I warned. Henry grabbed the tablet. I was holding to prove the boundaries. We had a tug. He let go when I tightened my grip. "Touch me again and you'll regret it," I said low. He smirked and replied with the kind of menace that says this isn't about law. It's politics and muscle. They left with a nod and a warning. "This isn't over. You'll hear from us." Their vehicle had no plates, just a gold HOA decal on the window. Watching them go, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the thought of a new kind of opponent. People who blended a suburban mandate with paramilitary theater. After they left, a sweep of the property turned up a torn-off trail cam and a motion sensor light, unscrewed and twisted. Someone had circuited the property that night. They were watching, realizing that the isolated feeling took a sharper edge. Someone had invested time and resources into harassing this landowner. This wasn't a neighborly misunderstanding. This was occupation and preparation. The next break-in attempt happened in the night. I woke to gravel shifting beneath boots and a motion alert from the driveway camera. Two masked figures with flashlights moved like they were comfortable in the dark. One was at the back by the latch. The other scanned the windows with a device that could have been thermal. I racked a shotgun, yelled at them to stop, and called the sheriff. They bolted, leaving behind a baseball bat, a crowbar, and a two-way radio tuned to a private frequency that crackled with a human voice. They weren't cops. They were operatives of some kind. Private patrol carrying out missions. The day after that, Colton showed up. He's the kind of man who keeps receipts and worse, keeps commitments. We worked on Olympia Task Force together until the job made us too old for naive hope and too stubborn to trust the system fully. Colton taught the county how to dig through paper trails, contacts, and thin alibis. When he watched the footage of Henry, he shrugged and said the name like unlocking a face. Henry Lott had been in traffic enforcement and had a record for pushing too hard. That fit the posture. Colton ran records, pulled maps, and traced the threads. He didn't speak the word organize until he had to. When he did, he said it like someone dropping a brick in a quiet room. Organize intimidation. The more we looked, the more it looked like a pattern. Similar complaints from other owners, phantom assessments, repeated patrols, and a slow campaign to make people leave their property without the legal headaches a court fight would cause. I got a visit from Karen Sheldon, the president of Clearwater Bay HOA. She arrived in a Lexus that smelled like leather and the world of people who think their bank accounts are their moral compass. She knocked, offered a peach pie, and a kind of oily smile rehearsed over a lifetime of convincing. "We just want to welcome you to the community," she chirped. "There's some confusion about boundaries. The board would be happy to review your application." I didn't take the pie. I told her I bought the land, produced a title, and had no intention of joining an association I hadn't consented to. Karen left with a warning in her eyes, not a neighborly regret. After Karen left came the psychological operations, a loop recording of barking dogs in the middle of the night, high-frequency humming that made it hard to sleep, the porch floodlight blinking like a heart under strain, the generator that would hiccup on a full tank. Colton called it classic pressure campaign tactics. Slowly grind a person down until the cost of staying outweighs the principle of staying. Meanwhile, a man in a windbreaker showed up with a photocopy of a stained document that claimed a narrow sliver of my land belonged to the HOA. The signature looked wrong. The company he represented when Colton checked it had been registered 2 weeks earlier and existed only as a P.O. box. Shell Company Theater. They were staging events and creating plausible deniability. The noises, breaking glass looped, recorded barks, siren snippets, were not spontaneous. They were a rotating set of annoyances designed to fray nerves. 3 sharp knocks at 4 a.m. landed just out of camera range and made me sit up with a shotgun in my lap and a slow, methodical anger in my belly. They wanted me to fold. They wanted to make the cabin worth abandoning. So I baited them. I recorded a casual, sloppy video of myself looking burned out, packing a few bags into the truck, muttering about needing a break, and posting it under a neglected motorcycle review channel. Within an hour it had views. Within a few days it had enough that I could be confident someone would notice. I wanted the people harassing me to think the pressure had worked. When they came that night, they expected an empty house. Instead, Thermal footage inside the blind spot captured one of them moving toward the shed with bolt cutters and another toward the door with a crowbar. I hit the siren and the floodlights. Their paralysis lasted seconds. I kicked open the door, shotgun raised. One fled into the woods. Another sprinted for a Jeep they had staged at the end of the drive. Colton sat in his car with engine off and lights out. He stepped out with a voice that cut quiet into obedience. 5 minutes later, the sheriff's deputies arrived. One man was caught. Craig Marlowe, a volunteer for Clearwater Bay. He had gloves, a radio tuned to the private frequency I'd recorded, and a map of my property marked with red X's where cameras, the generator, and the breaker box were sited. The backpack held physical evidence of the intent to remove my presence, eyes to disable the systems that made my life possible on that hill. Footage from a thermal camera, body cam, and Colton's dash cam stitched together a mosaic of organized, premeditated harassment. I uploaded the edited footage and titled it bluntly, "People Watched." Within a day, the story had traction. Internet attention turned a local violation of rights into a national example of how private power and intimidation could push people off land they legally owned. That visibility mattered. An anonymous tipster, probably someone on the inside with a conscience, sent us a thread of internal HOA communications. The phrase, apply noise cycle, disable solar, stage another presence event. He's cracked. Give it a few more days, sat in my inbox like a smoking gun. It was a plan, not an accident. Colton. And I sent everything to the state prosecutor's office. This was beyond HOA horsing. This was criminal conspiracy. By the time the courthouse in Libby filled with reporters and cameras, the case had passed from a local oddity to an indictment of deliberate, organized fraud and intimidation. Inside the courtroom, the charges read like a catalog of premeditation. Conspiracy to intimidate, falsification of property documents, unlawful surveillance, harassment, trespassing, and incitement to commit criminal trespass. The prosecution presented video, audio, and internal emails. Witnesses from other parcels testified they had been targeted similarly. Phantom fees, repeated patrol visits, unexplained power outages, even alleged animal poisoning when homeowners resisted bogus fines. Henry Lott's veneer cracked under cross-examination. He admitted he knew the property wasn't part of the HOA. "We don't care for paperwork," he said, helpfully summarizing their philosophy. Karen Sheldon, when shown messages where she called me a disease that needs to be excised and directed board members to use any means short of murder to get rid of me, cracked under pressure in a way only live cameras can produce. She ranted in court, accusing me of staging the whole thing. Her performance handed the press its soundbite and the jury its clarity. The courtroom became sterile theater for some and justice for others. When the verdicts came in on the last day, they were heavy and precise. Karen Sheldon received a sentence long enough to alter a life's arc. 14 years for criminal conspiracy, falsification of documents, incitement to trespass, and organized harassment. Henry Lott got 8 years for illegal entry and aggravated harassment. Richard Klaus received 6 years with parole eligibility after 3. Craig Marlowe, who cooperated and whose capture helped unravel conspiracy, received a suspended 3-year sentence and a fine. The county seized more than $300,000 from the HOA's accounts and directed the funds into a victim restitution fund. The Clearwater Bay HOA was ordered dissolved. On the morning Karen was taken away, the headlines did what headlines do. She became a symbol. Local and national outlets splashed out the story with glee. Memes circulated. For a while, the cabin and its little lakefront clearing became, improbably, a pulpit. After the verdict, I stayed put. Not because I feared a last-ditch retaliation. I had already watched the machine that moved against me grind to a halt in court, but because I had work to finish. No one wanted to hand a place back to the weather before they've sealed the seams. The silence that returned was different. Not merely the absence of threat, but the presence of ordinary life. Birds, the occasional outboard on the lake, the wind through a few loose shingles. It sounded like permission. The first order of business was the gate. I rebuilt it to be a real barrier. Reinforced steel posts sunk deep, a locking system that would make a thief curse, and a motion-triggered light array that would make a midnight tinker think twice. The sign went up, An old trespassing, HOA not recognized, protected by law, but I added a smaller, almost spiteful line. Smile, Karen. You're on camera. That one was less about deterrence than closure. Inside, I reshingled the roof properly, replaced busted windows with double-pane tempered glass, installed with stove that actually heated, and sealed the floorboards. I built a small deck facing the lake. 2 chairs, a table, the kind of place you can sit with beer and an honest sunset and not feel watched. I patched wiring and labeled breakers in a way that would have made an electrician clap. The generator was bolted down. The solar array was connected to redundant systems. The cameras were set with overlapping fields of view and encrypted backups of the footage. We cataloged everything with metadata tags and archival drives. Colton handed me a thumb drive with all the raw evidence and a suggestion: archive it. People will want the whole story, not just the highlight reel. They did. The footage I posted, first a bait video that led into the capture, grew fast. The channel, renamed Cabin Rights, became a hub. I posted dispassionate walkthroughs of how to read parcel maps, the steps to verify titles, how to file public records requests, how to identify forged documents. The stuff that had taken me years to learn sped into a format people could replicate. Short, methodical videos, step-by-step checklists, annotated screenshots. A lawyer in Texas used one of the videos to beat a fraudulent citation. A woman in Nevada showed the clips to her city council and convinced them to look again at their HOA ordinances. Emails poured in, thank you notes, offers to help, and pleas from strangers who have been bullied off their land. The dissolution of Clearwater Bay left a vacuum. For a while, the development felt ghostly. Board members scattered. Their Facebook group shuttered. Rumors said some residents were organizing a co-op, volunteer-run. Transparent governance, no uniformed men with sidearms. I liked that image, even if rumor is usually ahead of reality. A few neighbors, older folks who had lost parcels under pressure, started returning to their land with the look of people who'd been given back their names. One letter stood out in the pile of mail after the trial. It was handwritten, the curl of the pen deliberate, a small recipe card tucked inside. Mabel Hoffman, an original homeowner by the lake, sent a note. Thank you for breaking the fever, she wrote, and on a recipe card included the real version of Karen's peach pie. I laughed when I read it, a small, human reaction that felt like the most official validation I'd had in a long time. I tried the pie recipe badly and proudly, and it tasted like normalcy. The legal fallout had some quiet effects, too. The county set up a restitution fund for people who proved they had been forced off land because of Clearwater Bay's operations. There were hearings and hearings, and a small cadre of neighbors who had spoken in court began to receive the attention and small forms of compensation the system offers when it decides to act. It wasn't perfect, of course. No large bureaucracy is. But it was better than silence. As for me, I used the channel to keep doing what felt useful. I posted a video explaining how we caught Henry Lott and the others. The motion camera overlaps, the thermal blind spots we use, the small mistakes they made that betrayed their coordination. I uploaded documents showing the shell corporations, the forged signatures, and how a little scrutiny could blow holes in a supposed legal claim. The channel turned from bait into toolbox. I did interviews explaining the limits of private enforcement, the weird theater of HOAs that masquerade as community service, and the ways law can be weaponized when people confuse governance with dominion. A handful of volunteers from other states reached out offering help in archiving footage for others who might be facing similar harassment. A few lawyers offered pro bono consultations for people whose deeds were tarnished by suspicious filings. It was good to see the thread spread from my cabin into other people's lives. The idea that a stubborn streak and a porch camera could catalyze that was still surprising, and I didn't take credit for it. People had always been capable of pushing back once they saw the mechanics of their oppression laid out. The county took possession of Clearwater Bay's funds and used them in part to fund a legal clinic for small landowners and to underwrite a few forensic title searches that otherwise would have cost more than some folks could afford. It was both poetic and practical. Money that had been derived from intimidation now went back to picking apart the same mechanism and returning clarity to property records. People wanted details about the courtroom drama. I published a transcript with redactions where needed, and I posted a chronological timeline that matched timestamps from the cameras to emails and internal communications. Transparency was a good antidote to paranoia. When you can map every step and point to evidence, it becomes harder for stories to be rewritten into witch hunts. I'll be honest, there were times I still checked the camera feeds out of habit rather than necessity. Old enemies of the kind I'd once chased leave habits behind. It's a domestic vigilance, not a paranoia, to make sure the things you've earned don't get taken through technicalities and intimidation. But the nights felt cleaner. I slept better. The small rituals returned. Stacking firewood, fishing with a line off the dock, fixing a rocker on the deck. Colton still came up, always the man with a cup of coffee and a skeptical eye, and we traded stillness for a few beers and talked about the cases we'd handled that never made the papers. The human part of the story is what people like best. After the trial, a number of neighbors came by with small tokens, a jar of preserves, a hand-knitted scarf, and offered to look after the place if I needed to be gone. People I had never met called to check on the property. Letters arrived from strangers who had been bullied by organizations with less plausible defenses than Clearwater Bay. Common sense and solidarity can be slower than money and muscle, but they have a patience of their own. There were practical follow-ups, too. I testified in a hearing about tighter oversight of homeowner associations, and while changing law is like pushing a river, the case did catalyze discussions in the state legislature about registration and accountability for HOAs that operate patrols or maintain armed volunteers. It's not an automatic fix, but it's a step toward clarity. Private patrols with weapons, operating with the authority of intimidation, need clear rules. I kept an archive of everything. Colton insisted on multiple backups, drives in different jurisdictions, cloud repositories with encryption, and a hard copy binder with notarized transcripts. People will try to spin this, he said. If it's all scattered, it's easier to gaslight. If it's tight, it's harder. He was right. The archive turned out to be useful not just for press requests, but for researchers, a couple podcasters, and a law school class that wanted real-world material for a seminar on property law and private power. Gradually, the cabin settled into the role it had been meant to fill, a place where paper was reviewed by a desk lamp and the day closed with the kind of small satisfaction that belongs to those who make things with their hands. The lake reflected late light, without comment. Spring brought new growth along the fence line, and the sound of people returning to their properties. The camera that had once captured the night raid now documented the neighbor kids learning to fish. The final piece of closure arrived in a quiet way. A notice came from the county, an official update that the dissolved HOA's formal name and records had been scrubbed from the county's active registry and archived under a public record with disclaimers. It wasn't a declaration that the world had been set right, only a bureaucratic footstep that ensured the pathways to this kind of abuse were harder to walk quietly. Every so often I'll tell the story to someone who asks, and I'll leave out the parts that don't matter. I keep the outline, bought land, kept records, refused to cower, recorded evidence, sent to the state, watched the court do its scorched earth work. The arc comforts people because it's straightforward. When you fight with facts and a little stubbornness, sometimes the system works. Sometimes you end up with a jail queen of mean and a dissolved HOA. Sometimes you end up with a peach pie recipe and a friend named Colton who will always show up when you need the kind of help that is not flashy and is utterly necessary. Long after the cameras were archive labeled and the last reporter stopped asking for an interview, the porch became a place to sit and watch light. I rebuilt the front gate stronger than before, not because I wanted to fortify myself in the world, but because I wanted to protect the small, domestic rituals that make a place a home, a safe mailbox, a measured fence, a sign that reads "No Trespassing" in big letters, and underneath it, in smaller, defiant type, "Smile Karen. You're on camera, just for old-time sake." The sign is more a joke than a threat now. Mostly, it's a reminder of the time the quiet returned. Sometimes it seems the law can be slow and clumsy, and sometimes power is dressed in civility and calls itself community. But truth is a patient thing. When it's recorded, labeled, archived, and presented, when the small, boring work of documentation meets the stubbornness to not be bullied, it tends to win. Not always, not everywhere. But in that clearing by the lake, after the hammering in the courtrooms and the noise cycles. It won back my nights and let me rebuild a life that could breathe.